Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us for another segment. In this segment, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Andrew Miller, founder and chief operating officer at Karuna Therapeutics. He's going to talk about the company's lead product candidate, KarXT. He's also going to talk about how this investigational treatment offers a potential new approach to treating schizophrenia and other neuropsychiatric conditions. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Miller. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, was mental health your first love when you decided to go into healthcare?
So actually, I'm a PhD scientist by training, originally studied in chemical and biomolecular engineering. So that was my original interest and field of research. And, probably about 15 years ago, I had the opportunity to really get, some professional exposure to mood disorders as well as schizophrenia, and really developed a passion for mental health based on that, and have been working on it ever since.
Now, I mentioned that you're working on a potential treatment, a new approach to treat schizophrenia and other mental conditions. For listeners who may not be familiar with schizophrenia, tell us a little bit about this condition.
Sure. Well, I think with respect to patients living with schizophrenia, I think probably the thing that most people are perhaps most familiar with is the idea of psychosis or hallucinations, delusions. We refer to them as positive symptoms of schizophrenia. They're really the kind of the hallmark of schizophrenia. Behind that, there's also both negative symptoms or affective symptoms, things like anhedonia, as well as cognitive impairment associated with schizophrenia. So we kind of refer to that as the three symptom domains of schizophrenia. It's typically a disorder that presents in late teens, early adulthood. And patients will be symptomatic and in need of treatment really for the remainder of their lives after that. It's unfortunately something where patients are, not typically are living in some sort of supported care setting, family or otherwise, and often have difficulty being able to maintain employment, as well as typical social and familial relationships. So right now, unfortunately, the prognosis for patients long-term has some significant limits.
That is as a disease burden on the patient simply by living with the disease. But what about the stigma from the outside world about this particular mental health condition?
Yeah, I think that, unfortunately continues to be a significant issue in our society. And I think certainly outside of the United States as well. It really does place a big burden on patients. It adds a whole other level of complexity to patients and families as they're sort of receiving this diagnosis. I think it plays a big role in the continued sort of integration and role of patients in society in a number of different ways. And it really just adds on to the burden and uncertainty that patients, and I think caregivers and family members as well feel at this point in time. And I think the idea that we can't be open and speak freely about it really just kind of continues to contribute to that sort of a negative association and stigma associated with mental illness and schizophrenia specifically. I think it's something we continue to make progress on from a societal perspective, but certainly have a long way to go at this point.
Talk briefly about the historical treatment for schizophrenia and similar mental health conditions to schizophrenia, and why there is a need for a new treatment option that's safe and effective.
Yeah, well, I think that comes back to fundamentally what do we know about the disease and how does that inform how we treat it. And I think unfortunately, mental illness as a field, and schizophrenia specifically, we've really struggled despite the fact that all the scientific breakthroughs to really understand the developmental, the genetic aspects to disorders like schizophrenia. It's likely that schizophrenia is a very heterogeneous disease, has a lot of, perhaps related causes, but that makes it challenging to think about how we develop new treatments and new medicines for patients living with schizophrenia. Right now, all of those treatments really harken back to the original antipsychotic medicine, chlorpromazine. It was discovered sort of serendipitously or accidentally back in the 50s. It's fundamentally a modulator of dopamine, and all currently available treatments that have been introduced also modulate dopamine. Now, starting about 30 years ago, we also added some serotonin modulation to those treatments, but fundamentally right now, the same as 50 years ago, if you're seeking treatment for schizophrenia, you're going to be treated with some form of dopamine modulator. And those treatments do offer benefits, particularly towards the positive symptoms or psychosis of schizophrenia. Right now there's nothing that's currently available that's approved for treating the negative or affective symptoms of schizophrenia, nor the cognitive impairment associated with schizophrenia. These treatments are available. They do, unfortunately, have a number of significant long-term safety considerations associated, with that dopamine and serotonin mechanism of action. The things we talk about, most frequently tend to be the sedative effects, the weight gain and potential metabolic dysfunction and glucose intolerance, as well as the introduction of or initiation of movement disorders that are almost Parkinsonian-like syndromes in these patients due to the decreased dopamine signaling.
Now, I do understand that you're in testing and seeking approval for KarXT. Explain how this candidate works, and when do you expect some results from your tests?
Yeah, we're very excited about the potential of KarXT as a new treatment. As you mentioned, we've previously completed some human clinical trials. We have a number of additional studies ongoing, including our first phase 3 clinical trial reading out here in the third quarter of 2022, so here pretty quickly. I think why we're excited about KarXT and its potential is a completely different mechanism of action than all currently available treatments. I mentioned a moment ago how they all focus on either dopamine, and some also have some serotonin-based signaling. KarXT targets a completely different neurotransmitter system. They target the muscarinic acetylcholine receptors. And that key fundamental scientific difference, we believe, leads to some significant, potential advantages. We've been able to demonstrate in our initial trials a very robust effect towards psychosis or positive symptoms of schizophrenia. We've also seen some evidence of potential benefits towards the negative symptoms and cognitive symptoms of schizophrenia. But really, it comes back to that unique pharmacology and unique mechanism. I think, with many complex disorders, speaking, to mental illness, but outside of mental illness as well, think about oncology or other indications where we have multiple different treatment options that work fundamentally differently, and we can use them separately, we can use them together. I think, unfortunately, in schizophrenia, we just haven't really had that option because all of the available treatments have kind of the same underlying mechanism of action. I think our opportunity with KarXT is to introduce something completely new. I think our clinical data suggests potential broad benefits. It also, I think, suggests that it's not associated with the most problematic side effects of existing treatments, namely the sedative effects, weight gain, metabolic dysfunction, and these movement disorder symptoms that I referred to earlier. I think if we're able to continue to demonstrate that in our additional clinical trials, I think KarXT has the potential to be an exciting new treatment option that really is different from current therapies.
Give us a website where we can learn more.
Yeah, so you can go to www.karunatx.com. That's KARUNATX.com.
Dr. Miller, I appreciate you giving us some of your time. Thank you so much for this information, and I'm hoping that you'll return.
Great. I've enjoyed the conversation as well. Always happy to talk about what we're doing and hopefully the positive impact we can have on patients and caregivers, and in general, the field of psychiatric and mental illness.
Well, as I said, I appreciate you joining us here on Health Professional Radio. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Great, thank you.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Andrew Miller. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Listen in, download at SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com, Health Professional Radio.